Okay, good evening everyone. Damien O'Dowd is my name. You're all very welcome to this evening's public lecture. Tonight's lecture is Mind Over Exams, Strategies for Staying Calm and Confident, and is the final in our 2025 series to date. St John of God University Hospital is committed to raising awareness and reducing stigma around mental health through initiatives such as our public lecture series. We also deliver mental health first aid training nationwide in clubs, colleges, workplaces and community groups, because we believe that open conversations and accessible information around mental health benefit everyone in society. Tonight's lecture will take about 45 to 50 minutes. It'll be followed by a short interval, during which time the question sheet that was on your chair will be collected by a member of our team and given to the panel for the question and answer session. We plan to finish this evening around 9 p.m. Our event is being live streamed and will be available through our website in the coming days. Before we commence proceedings, I'd kindly ask you to either silence or switch off your mobile phone. In the event of an emergency, the exit door is through the door you came in, and there are exits from the building both to the right and to the left, and toilets are to the left past main reception and left through the set of double doors past the coffee shop. We hope you enjoy the evening and find the talk beneficial. Our speaker this evening is Crean, Senior Occupational Therapist, and I'll hand you over to Katie Moynihan, who is a Senior Occupational Therapist and our chair for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So this evening we're here to talk about managing exam stress, and as occupational therapists we feel we're very well suited to this. So the goal of occupational therapy is to support people to be able to do the things they want to do every day, to participate in the things and to flourish. So I suppose we want to focus on strategies that are realistic, and we want to focus on everyday strategies to manage stress and to be able to help the person to do these things. We know that what we do impacts how we think and how we feel. So we'll be looking at practical strategies and how the environment can support and how it might hinder. We will look at how to adapt and modify the environment. So our speaker here this evening, as mentioned, Katie Crean, graduated from South Bank University in London in 2012 in occupational therapy, and has worked since then in acute mental health. So I suppose when I started, Katie was my supervisor, so it's a pleasure to be introducing her this evening. And she's given a lot of talks, so in organisations and in different city colleges as well, on everyday well-being, but also in managing stress. So it's with pleasure I'd like to introduce Katie Crean to deliver the talk.
Okay, so thanks to Kate and to Damien for the introductions. It's really nice to be speaking to you all this evening. So what we're going to look at is Mind Over Exams, the strategies to stay calm and confident in exam season. So this is just an agenda of what we're going to get through today. I'll probably just start by saying the audience that we have here, you might be a young person facing into the exams, you might be a parent or a carer who's supporting the person, and you might be a mature student, maybe watching the stream online, that you're going back and you're back into the exam season. What I would say is that all the strategies we're going to discuss this evening are strategies that we can all use. So great to learn them when we're in adolescence, but they're strategies that can help us all through stressful times. Okay, so we're going to start off just by discussing the adolescent brain, and so how it's kind of different to the adult brain. We'll kind of go in then to talk about stress and cortisol, and how stress can kind of work for us and work against us sometimes. Then we'll move on and talk about the optimal conditions for staying calm and learning. So these are like the strategies that we can do, the things that we can do to help. Then we'll move on and talk about the importance of co-regulation and de-escalation. And then, as said, there'll be a bit of a time for a break and then a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so the adolescent brain. So the brain itself stops growing when we're about in kind of early adolescence, but it doesn't stop developing until our kind of mid to late 20s. And that time in between, I suppose it's a time of rapid changes. There's a lot going on, but what we know as well, there's parts of the brain that aren't fully developed yet. So one of the main parts is around the prefrontal cortex at the front, and it's in an area called executive functioning. So you might have heard that term before, but executive functioning, it's those skills like being able to plan, prioritize, problem solve, being able to kind of evaluate and make changes of our behavior. So the other thing is that brain development isn't really linear. So it's a time when there's lots of changes going on, but it can be a little bit messy because we're not really sure what's happening at the time. So we're going to watch just a short video by the University of Oxford, which explains this in a little bit more detail.
Between childhood and adulthood, our hormones kick-start a phase of significant change. And while the physical changes of adolescence may be obvious, less visible are changes that these hormones trigger in our brains, which might just be responsible for turning our teenage years into a bit of a roller coaster. Throughout our lives, our brains undergo a process called neural pruning. The synapses through which our neurons communicate are either lost or strengthened, depending on how much we use them. Well-used synapses grow strong, while the weaker ones fade away. It's this process that makes us capable of faster, clearer, and more complex thought as we grow up. But, crucially, pruning happens at different rates in different areas of the brain. By the time we're adolescents, the neural networks that communicate emotions and reward are well developed, while others, which may help us to plan, prioritise, think logically, and moderate our social behaviour, are yet to mature. So, a potential mismatch between our emotion and our judgment arises just as our emotional and social worlds are becoming more complex, making an increase in social anxiety quite normal at this time. Researchers at the University of Oxford want to know how this might affect our behaviour as we progress through our teenage years. In a recent study, they focused on the social worries many of us feel as adolescents. When presented with photographs of ambiguous social scenes and asked to imagine themselves in the picture, anxious younger teens were more likely than others to perceive negativity. But while these heightened emotions and the struggle to control them can make adolescence a difficult time for some, it's also a golden time for learning and growth. The adolescent brain is particularly agile and flexible, and as such, it's especially open to new opportunities, new technologies, and new experiences. So while our teenage years may feel pretty weird, they're also pretty wonderful. To explore how your brain develops, visit www.oxfordsparks.ox.ac.uk and tell us what you think on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, so I suppose what what the main points of what the video are saying is that parts of the brain are really developed, like the kind of emotional and social is really developed, but as I mentioned, that executive functioning, that problem solving, planning isn't, and they are the kind of key skills for studying. So unfortunately there is a bit of a mismatch between the kind of logic and the emotion, but a real positive is that there's no other stage in the life of your brain where you will have so much development, and so it is so ready to take on things. And so that's why, apart from managing the exams, it's a really good time to learn these skills because anxiety management skills, unfortunately, we need them for all our life. So it can be a really good time and you're in a really good place to learn these skills. So just to talk a little bit more about cortisol. So cortisol is kind of known as our stress hormone, and it helps us kind of manage stress. Like cortisol, when we have the right amount of it, helps us manage stressful situations, get through things. It's developed in the adrenal gland, and then it works with other hormones for like physiological processes in our bodies. And so like it's not even just involved in stress. So cortisol helps with metabolism rates. It supports our immune functioning. It influences our sleep-wake cycle. And it also is responsible for memory formation. So even when you see the other processes that it's involved in, you can kind of see that maybe when cortisol is kind of out of control and stress is out of control, that it can impact us in many different ways. So we're going to watch another video again. And this is just understanding stress really in the context for adolescents.
Over 1,200 installations. That is how many solar PV systems Solar Smart has installed and supplied to commercial and residential customers.
Pardon me, that's skipped on to the next video, so we'll just go back one. There we go.
I'm Dr. Bill Kafalis. I'm the Medical Director of the University of New South Wales Health Service. Stress is a normal thing for a human being. What happens in your body is that adrenaline is pumped through your arteries, and your heart goes faster, your pulse goes up, your blood pressure goes up. People can feel their head pounding. People can feel themselves flushed or sweaty. People can feel that their vision's not quite right. They can feel a bit sick in the stomach. They can have a very worried feeling in their mind. In, say, an exam situation, we know from a lot of research that your performance in an exam actually improves as your stress level increases to a certain point. At that point and after, if you become too stressed, then your performance decreases. So, of course, that's a negative aspect of stress. The other negative aspects of stress can be that if it goes on for a long time, then you can be worried and thinking about things in a very negative way for long periods of time, which can really sort of wear you down, can make you tired, it can give you long-term headaches. It can even lead sometimes to depression if it goes on for too long. As parents, when we know that our children are going through difficult times, we need to be on the lookout for some changes in behaviour or things that they might be feeling that might signal that they're suffering from excessive stress. Things like poor sleep, getting to bed too late, feeling quite fatigued or not being themselves, saying they're tired all the time, maybe not eating very well. They might be telling us that they've got headaches or that they've got their tummies playing up again, sitting in their room a lot of the times on the weekends and when they're usually out with their friends. So these sorts of things we have to be mindful of and think that that might be a sign that they're suffering from excess stress.
Okay, so I suppose what the video is saying is that, you know, stress can work for us in small amounts. If we can manage cortisol, then it actually can allow us to function very well. But if we kind of have too much, then we start to see a decline in our functioning. And, you know, stress lives in the body, so it's really normal that it's kind of physical things that you see to do with stress. So I think everyone knows, you know, butterflies in your stomach, or if you're really stressed, you might have stomach problems, tension in your shoulders, headaches, and it's all the body's way of saying that there's too much cortisol. And as Dr. Bill said, kind of if it goes unchecked, then it can kind of get into chronic stress. I suppose the good side of it is that if we can manage the amount of cortisol, it can actually work really well for us. So we're going to talk now a little bit about cortisol management, and I'm just going to grab my bottle of water as a way of describing it. So if we imagine that this glass is us, and then this is the cortisol. So we start the day with quite a high amount of cortisol, because that's to give us our get up and go and, get moving. And then we might go into school, and then it's stressful because everyone's talking about the exams. And then situations, maybe friends, all the kind of life stresses. And so we have this cortisol building up and building up. So what we don't want, like it said in the video, if it gets to the point where this isn't working for us and it's actually going to kind of impede our functioning. So cortisol management, if you can imagine, is what we want to do is manage the amount by tipping it out bit by bit. And the way to tip it out bit by bit are some examples here: balanced nutrition, activities, and the strategies that we're going to use. So it's making cortisol work for us. So in terms of diet, so a balanced diet rich in whole foods, plenty of fruit, veg, lean proteins, healthy fats, foods that support adrenal functioning, dark leafy greens, fatty fish. And again, if you don't eat fish, it's just using the supplements. Nuts and seeds, fermented foods, limit processed foods, obviously not alcohol, but even kind of making sure not to go for those quick hits. Like energy drinks, you're going to have a spike and then you're going to have a crash. So what we want is kind of an even keel, and then these would be the foods to kind of target. And then I suppose there can be a feeling, or it's part of the anxiety about exam season, that everything has to be focused on doing exams. But if we think back to the kind of parts of the brain that aren't really completely developed, we need to do other things to support the executive functioning and the development of that. So things like playing sports, it's kind of working memory, problem solving, risk taking in a team environment, great skills to have. Yoga and meditation, and we'll speak a little bit more detail about mindfulness, but yoga and meditation, it's helping practice sustained attention. And it's also what meditation does, it helps us kind of create more reflective thinking patterns. So where we can kind of evaluate situations. And it's actually shown with mindfulness that the more you practice mindfulness, the more you're able to, when you're even in a fight or flight situation, that you have an ability to be able to evaluate the situation and go, actually, it's not the end of the world, and I can calm down from this. So really important for self-regulation. Playing a music or learning an instrument or being in theatre, skills development, cognitive ability, selective attention. So these are all really core skills. And unfortunately, not everything comes from the books. These things are really, really going to help us with doing the study. And then strategy games and puzzle. So problem solving, focus, attention, really, really good for that. And then computer games. Even computer games in moderation can be very effective. They're great for hand-eye coordination. They're also good so that if there's games that are open world, where you have to kind of think about multiple situations in your head, is a brilliant skill to develop. So while we can be very focused on the exams, the balance is really, really important. And also, I suppose, like Dr. Bill said, stress, unfortunately, when it gets too much, we have a tendency to kind of retreat, and maybe being in the bedroom seems like a better option, but it doesn't, it can lead to us having kind of low mood, withdrawing. So as much as we can, trying to stay kind of socially active while we're going through exams. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about mindfulness. So mindfulness is just an approach of paying attention to the present moment. And I suppose the most traditional way you might know of mindfulness is doing a sitting meditation where you focus on the breath. I quite like this quote from John Kabat-Zinn. So you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. So unfortunately, the exams are happening, but what you do have control over is your skills and ability to manage it and to manage a stressful situation. And then on top of that, the evidence shows that mindfulness reduces cortisol. It improves attention, memory, and mood. So we're going to move on and we're going to do a little mindfulness practice. So I'd encourage everyone to have a go at this. So this is a meditation practice called the Starfish. So it's used a lot even in primary schools to teach mindfulness, but it's for every age. And sometimes it's good, you want to find the coping skills and strategy that match the situation. So like, let's say if we're really, really stressed, sometimes trying to sit and do a breathing meditation and focus on that is probably the last thing you want to do and doesn't really feel. So this uses our body a little bit, and it's a very short practice. So I will just get it on now.
Start below your thumb, down at your wrist, and wait for your next in-breath. With your finger, trace your in-breath carefully up your thumb. You need to time it so that you're at the very tip of your thumb when your in-breath becomes an out-breath. Then breathe down your thumb for your out-breath so that you're at the very bottom when your out-breath becomes an in-breath. Remember, no messing with your breath. Speed up or slow down your finger instead. Breathe up. Rest at the base of your wrist. Check in to see how you're feeling. Then swap hands, settling at your wrist and breathing up your thumb and down. Letting your attention rest in your breath and your fingers. Up and down. Your breath natural, really at ease. In and out. Then pause again at your wrist. How are you feeling? Starfish is for everyone, no matter how big or little our hands are. It can help us if we wake in the night and we're feeling worried. Or at times where we're feeling angry. It helps us relax for a moment, just where we are, just as we are. Starfish helps us to be a friend to ourselves and to remember that we're okay. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Hi.
So it's a really simple exercise, easy to remember. These are your starfish. So I've done this practice with Orla, who's the mindfulness practitioner, and she said, sometimes you do it 10 times on each hand, but and we're going to talk about the importance of breaks with studying. If we just want kind of a reset where we feel like I just need to kind of feel a bit calm and grounded, something like the starfish or doing breathing exercises can be really helpful. And, also it helps with attention because it's the hardest thing ever just to focus on the present. But the more of these skills we practice, the more we can kind of manage the stress of everyday situations.
Come to Starfish.
Okay. Another, I suppose this is very much a study technique. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Pomodoro technique. So the Pomodoro technique was developed in 1987 by Francesco Cirillo. He was in university at the time. I think he was doing software engineering, but he found he was really struggling with focus. So the Pomodoro, it was very 1980s. He had one of those kitchen timers in the shape of a tomato, and he said, I'm going to do 25-minute bursts of focused work and then taking breaks. So it's a really useful time management technique. In particular, so what I mentioned before about executive functioning, a lot of these strategies you will see will say that they're for people with ADHD. And that's because executive functioning is a kind of pervasive problem with ADHD throughout life. It's difficult. So a lot of these strategies, they'll say, oh, for ADHD, but they're strategies we can all use because everyone struggles with focus. We definitely struggle with focus when it's something that we're not interested in as well. So unfortunately, the subjects that we don't like, it is much harder to do that. So now, as it's been going for like 40 years, nearly 40 years, you don't just need the timer. There's an app. And then one of the criticisms from the ADHD community was that sometimes the hyper focus that you can achieve with ADHD, 25 minutes is not enough. So now you can adapt. So you can make it a longer, like let's say, oh, actually 40 minutes is better for me. You can do that. So it's a very popular worldwide technique. One big fan of the Pomodoro technique, I don't know if this is a recommendation, but Elon Musk uses the Pomodoro technique. So, I mean, he does get a lot done, but maybe we don't like what he does. But it can be for productive people. It's a great tool. So we're going to just watch a short video. So this is about this is a university student talking about how he uses the Pomodoro technique.
At Amazon, you'll find quality products you can trust at prices you'll feel good about.
There are so many different kinds of revision techniques out there. Quick Google about revision techniques, and you'll see 5 or 6 different articles giving contrasting views and contrasting opinions and saying just sit down and prep for it, just do everything that you can, just find out what works best for you. This technique is more of a short, structured way of going about the revision process, and it is picking a topic or picking particular tasks that you want to accomplish and working on that for 20 to 25 minutes. Very intense, very focused work, either reading or notating. And then at the end of that time period, you take a 5-minute break, which you might be able to have a drink, get a bite to eat, mess about on your phone, or even close your eyes and recharge the batteries. And what this does is kind of resets the focus and attention of the mind, so that when you do come back to revising again, you'll maintain a very high level of focus, which creates those neural connections and really reinforces those memories, those things that you're trying to call upon. You do this for about maybe 3 or 4 cycles, and at the end of let's say the 4th cycle, for example, you then take a 30-minute break, you take a large break, which allows you to recharge even more. And by doing this over and over again, you can really get in hours worth, 4 or 5 hours worth of work in a day, and you don't even realize how much work you've actually done. And it's also very structured, the work that you're doing, and you can tick off topics one by one. So it could be a very interesting and effective method to try. Balance is key. Making sure that you're taking breaks, even if you don't feel like you need a break, and sticking to the routine itself, because it's a particular technique. So there's research gone into why you take breaks at certain times, but don't overdo it, and don't push yourself. And of course, regular water breaks can also help and eating. So balance is definitely very key and an important thing in executing the technique.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not only a technique when we're teenagers. Like my work in the hospital here, I'd work with adults, and a lot of people would use the Pomodoro technique to have be able to focus on tasks and work. And it's very effective. Like I know remember my study, when I was studying, I used to try study for 3 hours straight and think I was brilliant, and then I try take a break, but I was completely addled by the end of it and not able to go back. So I think, you know, and even when we think of like the Starfish or, you know, those little exercises, they're to help us kind of get back in. Because another kind of part of executive functioning that is quite hard is continuation, which means when we take a break, we're able to go back. And unfortunately, with the best will in the world, if we don't have a kind of structured break, it's very easy then that the kind of break goes on a bit longer than we had anticipated. There we go. So now it is time for a movement break. So in your chair, wiggle your toes, rock your feet up and down, do a torso twist, just giving yourself that. A chair sit up where you just kind of push yourself up off the chair and hold yourself up for a few seconds. Stretch your upper body, have a yawn, do a few shoulder rolls. So we're doing this because it's kind of a natural time to take a break anyway, because we've been talking for about 25 minutes. But also is that when we sit for a long time, we tend to lose focus. And so I'm going to talk about it in more detail, but movement is a really important regulator. So movement breaks are small movements that we do, and it gives us enough sensory input to help us have this kind of ideal thing of being calm and alert. So we need to be calm to learn. That's why anxiety management is so important with exams. But it's important just to give yourself that little movement, and you might even notice that you feel a bit kind of refreshed by that. So a good thing is to even using the kind of Pomodoro idea of about 20-25 minutes, but incorporating movement breaks into your study. It's really, really important. And that, I suppose, leads on to kind of a bigger thing we're going to talk about is the senses. So movement breaks are part of like how we can kind of regulate through the senses. So we've got our sensory systems up here. So the first thing to kind of point out is that we don't have 5 senses, we have 8. And the ones you might not know about are proprioception. So that is position sense. So it's kind of like our internal body map, that we know what our body is doing in time without having to look at it. Then we've got vestibular. So vestibular is all about our kind of movement sense. So the vestibular sense is located in the inner ear, and it's why it's kind of to do with our coordination between our brain and our eyes, that when we stand up, we don't feel dizzy and fall back down, because we're able to kind of manage those changes in our head position. So vestibular, if someone had an issue with vestibular, if someone, like some people get travel sick and some people don't, and it's just that more common when you're a child, but that's part of your vestibular system. Some people love going on roller coasters, and then other people would feel like sick at the thought of it, and that's to do with vestibular. And even if you think it's located in the inner ear, so if anyone's ever had an ear infection and felt like they lost their balance, it's to do with this sense. And then the third one is interoception, which is kind of our sense of the internal things that are happening in our body. So someone who might have kind of poor interoception doesn't know when they're hungry, doesn't know when they're thirsty, finds it hard to know if they're too hot or too cold. So all this, kind of how all the senses work, they work on thresholds. So each sense is different, but you might have a low threshold to some sensory input. So for example, I have a really low threshold for auditory input, which means that I hear everything and noise really bothers me. So I know if I have to get a lot of work done, I can't be in a shared office. I can't, like, other things around me is not going to work because I know what my sensory triggers are. So each person will have, across each sense, different thresholds. So when we've got low thresholds, we don't need a lot of information before we have a reaction to it. If we've got high thresholds, that means there are senses that we can usually regulate through. So if you love lots of tactile input and love massages and maybe like things like weighted blankets, then that's another self-regulation skill that you have through the senses. It also means that sometimes we need more information to have a proper response if we've got a high threshold. So if you're the neurodiverse population are more likely to have sensory differences. So maybe someone who has ADHD needs a lot of movement to regulate every day. So they need to do movement breaks, they need to do weights, they need to do lots of things because that helps them function properly. So the senses, most occupational therapists will do a sensory assessment, but in all honesty, it's stuff you kind of already know because everyone kind of knows I'm sensitive to noise, or example like foods I hate. Oh, I hate mushrooms. And that's actually a tactile thing because it's about texture. Or I hate labels on clothes. But when we get an idea of what our sensory kind of regulators are and stressors, it can help us plan our time a lot better and plan for any distractions that we'd have that would get in the way of study. There probably are, like there is with maybe ADHD checklists, there's probably online sensory checklists that you can do. But again, an occupational therapist would definitely do a profile. So moving on to the next thing, so WTF, so it's what's the function? So when we're kind of in a situation we don't want to be, we have this kind of experiential avoidance where we kind of don't want to be there and don't want to do it, but that often we kind of get into a behavior that isn't really working for us, that's not helping us towards our goals. So this comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, but it's a good question to ask maybe when we're trying to study and it's not working, or we feel like our plan's not working, is to ask WTF, what am I trying to do? And are my behaviors and goals working towards what I want to achieve? And again, this is something with executive functioning and metacognition. Sometimes a younger person might need a bit of support to see this as well. So kind of up until this point, we've been talking a lot about self-regulation. Another thing to talk about is co-regulation. So co-regulation is what people can do around a person to help them, to support them. So co-regulation is something that all parents do. So we'll just watch a short video on it.
Wide a selection of cars for sale from trusted dealerships. Visit dundeal.ie.
You know that feeling when your alarm goes off on Friday morning at 5 a.m. Oh, to turn it off and go back to sleep. But today you have an important early meeting. So you take a deep breath, focus on the goal of completing that project you really care about, and you drag yourself out of bed. This is an example of what scientists call self-regulation. It's the act of managing our thoughts and feelings so we behave in ways that help us reach our goals. Self-regulation keeps you from saying something hurtful out loud to a coworker, like, "That's a really bad idea." Or, when you disagree with someone, self-regulation looks like choosing to communicate calmly and respectfully, because it's more important to you to take good care of that relationship than it is to win an argument. We need self-regulation to stay healthy and to succeed in school or at work, in relationships, and in life as a whole. It's a skill worth focusing on. Some think that self-regulation is something you're born being good at, or not. But this is a myth. Anyone can build self-regulation skills over time, like a muscle. And as we build those muscles, we get better at important things, like managing strong emotions in healthy ways, staying on a task even when it's hard, and considering the perspectives of others so that our relationships can thrive. Research shows that adolescence is a critical window of opportunity for building self-regulation muscles, because just like in early childhood, the brain is growing and building connections based on youth's experiences. This growth really impacts those areas of the brain that support self-regulation. One thing to know is the term self-regulation is misleading, because we don't develop it by ourselves. Its development has much more to do with the people in a person's life and what's going on around them. When a person has nurturing and accepting relationships in supportive environments, self-regulation skills can grow. Whereas harsh or inconsistent relationships and stressful or chaotic environments short-circuit the development of self-regulation. Knowing that, just think of how important your influence can be on an adolescent's life. You have a powerful opportunity to help youth build their self-regulation skills by providing support through something called co-regulation. Co-regulation means having intentional interactions with young people that foster the skills they need to build healthy and happy lives. To co-regulate means to be caring, responsive, and accepting. Create nurturing, safe spaces to practice and learn. Teach and coach skills that build self-regulation muscles, all while practicing your own self-regulation. Co-regulation happens when we intentionally synchronize these actions as we manage our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So often, adults take a step back from youth as they hit adolescence, when what youth really need during this time is the opposite. There are many ways to grow your skills as a co-regulator. We'll offer 3. First, practice improving your own self-regulation. It's good for you, and it's important to model when working with youth. Second, build warm relationships and nurturing environments. Imagine yourself as a young person in your program. Do you feel cared for, accepted, and known by the staff? Does the environment feel supportive to you as an individual? Third, coach self-regulation skills. Help youth reframe mistakes as opportunities to try something new and to build their self-regulation muscles. When youth practice their skills, they improve those skills and feel better about themselves. These things may be part of your practice already, but now you have a name, co-regulation, for the kind of support you want to provide. And there's always more to learn. As an adult working with adolescents, you matter. Don't underestimate the impact you can have on their lives. From how you greet each young person in the morning, to the coaching conversations you have, to how you react in front of youth when things don't go exactly the way you planned. Using a co-regulation approach can support a young person in ways that matter to them now and in their future. Fostering a co-regulation mindset is an investment worth making for all of us.
Okay. So again, it's saying, the self-regulation strategies work for everyone. And that another thing to remember is that we can model, and, it's not only, I suppose this video is talking about probably to healthcare staff, but it's all those other things as well that can provide co-regulation. So as I said earlier, the extracurricular activities, the being part of a team, there's other ways to regulate apart from, inside the family. So in terms of co-regulation for when we're in adolescence, as we said, the things we need to work on are executive functioning. So executive functioning involves being able to plan, organise information, manage time, working memory, metacognition. And in order to be able to do this, we need to be able to inhibit responses, think before we act, manage our emotions, sustain attention, start tasks, be flexible, and keep going till we accomplish our goals. So for parents, how we can kind of, co-regulate is focus on the planning process, because that's the issue. And probably the kind of blind spot that maybe a young person might have. Help teens develop plans, and then being mindful of your own stress levels. So the exam time is stressful for everyone, but emotions are contagious. So if there's a feeling of high stress in the house, everyone picks that up. So again, the mindfulness techniques, the breathing techniques, good for everyone to do. And then creating a calm home environment and limit distractions. So even thinking about the sensory environment, how do we have the optimal conditions to work? So research shows that we work better under natural daylight, but often, by the time we get home from school, it's the evening time. So whether thinking, not that you want to give up your weekend, but sometimes it's better to do work during the day. And then thinking about those distractions as well, you know, auditory distractions, you know, lots of noise in the house, things going on. So we can help kind of create a calm home environment as well. And just the other box here is just, I suppose, these would be the steps that I would use with patients of improving executive functioning. So it's really simple, but it's these 5 steps. What do I need to do, or what do I want to do? What's required of me? Why might this be difficult for me? Make a plan that overcomes the difficulties. Try the plan, but then reflect on whether the plan worked, and then move back to step 3. So it's evaluating if it worked, and if not, go back a few steps. So moving on from co-regulation, we're just going to talk a little bit about de-escalation. So de-escalation is when there's a bit of a crisis. So to de-escalate is to reduce the level of intensity of a crisis. So this might be when we're really, really, really stressed. So it's important, I suppose, it's a crisis, so you don't really have a lot of time to think in the situation. And you probably won't have time to kind of put a detective hat on and go, what's going on? Why has it resulted in this kind of crisis? Important to remember is that when we're in a kind of heightened state of anxiety, the rational brain is not working. The emotion-focused brain is what's working. So we need to kind of think about that in our responses. So if we kind of have a logical response, it doesn't make sense to the person who's in the crisis. So, you know, if, let's say the young person says, I'm going to go in tomorrow, I don't know anything, I'm going to fail this exam completely. And hopefully you're trying to appease and placate and go, what are you talking about? You did brilliant in the mocks. That just doesn't make sense to the person at the time, because the logic and reason is not there. And so you might use kind of acknowledge where they're at and validate. So these kind of statements, I hear you, I'm right here for you, I can see you're worried about that, it's tough, it sounds hard. So we can't, when the emotion brain is kind of dominant, there's not problem solving there. We're not going to be able to work through it through talking. And actually it's more, anxiety management strategies are best when they involve our body, because the mind isn't. And even for adults, if you've ever been in a really kind of stressful situation, argument with a partner, and someone says to you, oh, will you just calm down? Like, does it ever work? It doesn't, because we're not in the place where we can hear that. So I suppose we're just trying to kind of de-escalate the situation and move on. And then it's, I suppose, our verbal, but also our non-verbal. So our body language, expressions, having respect for personal space. So sometimes when someone's really intense, you're feeling, or you just want to go hug them, but they mightn't be in a place to do that. And then just to ensure safety. So again, like, de-escalation is kind of at crisis level, but this is an effective way to manage what hopefully is a very short-term crisis. So we've come to the end of the main presentation, and just to kind of recap on a few key points. So firstly, adolescent brains are different. There's a bit of development still needed. Cortisol management is really important. So how do we manage the stress? And that's about activities, self-regulation skills, co-regulation. But also it's a golden time for skills development. So your brains are in a place where you're primed to take on lots of skills and strategies. And these skills and strategies are strategies that you can use throughout life, not just for the exam season. The senses are important. So having the optimal environment and having the right amount of sensory input is really helpful. So it helps us just get to that where we can function at a good level. And then finally, co-regulation and de-escalation. So what we do and what we say really matters. And if we can co-regulate and manage crises, then that's going to be a great help as well. Okay, so thanks everyone. Thank you. So I think we're having a short break now. Yep.
Break first, and then we'll come back
For if you have questions. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so thanks for your questions, and thanks for those as well who have sent them in, who plan to watch back as well. So we've had just a quick look at them, so bear with us. We might have to, there's a lot came through, but I'll start and we might just link in and jump in as we go. So the first one we have here is asking for possible strategies or extra strategies when you are co-regulating with anxious gifted students. So just maybe to reword that, what I'm taking from that is that possibly somebody is struggling working with people who are anxious and they are also very academic. So maybe they can do very well and they see that possibly these people are able for a lot and the anxiety is holding them back a little bit. So myself and Katie just looked at this one and we kind of just mentioned that, I suppose, it's also to remind yourself that it's not going to be perfect. Things can't be perfect, and healthy stress is also normal. So healthy levels of stress are important, and as Katie mentioned in the presentation, that we all need a certain amount of stress to be motivated. So strategies to co-regulate is maybe to remind the students that they're doing really well, that to keep the motivation going by reminders of all the other aspects of life that are also working well and continuing them. Anything else that you thought of there?
I suppose like when someone is stressed, the one thing that's really off is their perception, so that they, and it's when we're all anxious, we tend to think the absolute worst. So I suppose it's trying to, in particular with strategies, I'd say mindfulness would be a very useful strategy, because it's really about being able to evaluate and kind of be non-judgmental. And I suppose a big part of mindfulness, it's a stepping stone to self-compassion. So sometimes the really high achieving students are really, really hard on themselves. So, you know, doing those strategies that work particularly with that would be quite helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep. Will I keep going or? Yep.
Go. I'll pop in.
So the next question then is, how can I use the Pomodoro technique when I'm struggling to get started or to stay motivated? So I suppose today we're looking at exam stress in terms of presenting with anxiety and feeling stressed about exams. So this question then here is highlighting that the person is struggling to get started. So I'm just going to take it that the difficulty that the person's having initiating the study or getting started with the study is because of anxiety, okay, because of the stress. And I'm just highlighting that because that's the first thing I thought of, is that there's lots of other reasons that could also be causing difficulty getting started. But just to look at this anxiety and the stress, again, it's going back to what Katie looked at in the presentation around maybe it's starting the day doing something that's not study. Maybe it's starting with other aspects of life that are important to the person or that are going to support that person. Could be the sports, could be the relaxation activities, could be just getting moving in the morning, or it could be resting, doing something to calm. So it's just maybe again about routine and looking at your routine and everything that's involved outside of the study as well. Yeah. Yep. I have another one that's actually quite similar to that. So it's somebody who might feel quite overwhelmed before they even get started. So a student or an adolescent who feels the anxiety is causing so much overwhelm that the person is not able to actually start studying at all. And then they create a difficult environment, so it basically just falls apart. It sounds like it's a bit of a crisis. So again, that's probably similar in terms of having a good routine, good structure. The day doesn't become completely or entirely around the study. That's, I suppose, crucial in that if everything in your entire day is about the exams and study and, you know, what time are you going to do it, or it's going to create a feeling of overwhelm, and just to create that safety, as you highlighted in the presentation, that there's so much other things that are important as well. And I can see that, and they're important that you do that. So this is one part. Yes, it's a big part, but it's to create that calm environment with the person, maybe through co-regulation as well. So that's that one. And the one last one here, sorry, that I have is any tips on memory recall for a mature student, female over 50. So with this one, I suppose there's lots of apps and there's lots of tips out there for memory, and it's repetition. So it is that repeating and that repetition. So as we say, the more we do something, the better we get at it. So again, it's the same with the memory. So you're going to recall better if you do practice it a bit more, or maybe read it a little bit more. But the other thing to mention around this one is if you can try and make it fun. So if it's a subject, or if it's something that's maybe not of particular interest, I think you mentioned that as well, or something that you don't really particularly like to study or read about, maybe it's finding a way that just to make it a little bit more enjoyable, whether it's through a game, through visuals, so maybe color coding, maybe using music, so something that you can maybe use alongside it to help with that. Yeah, any other ones? Yeah.
Like play is really, so we learn like we learn initially when we're children through play, but it actually remains the same as an adult, that we can take in information a lot quicker if we make a game or some kind of play out of it. So finding some way, I remember in university there was all those mnemonics for remembering different cranial nerves and all that. And you're more like, if it's kind of fun and novel, it's much easier to remember than if it's just especially if it's something that you're not very, very motivated for taking the information in for. So finding play ways of doing is really good. Yeah.
For sure. Okay. Yep.
The first one I've got here, so how not to not get overwhelmed when planning study or studying. So what I would say about the planning is, if we're feeling anxious or like overwhelmed, it's not the time to plan, because our perception and our judgment is off. And this is where kind of co-regulation can really come in, is that we try find a time when we're feeling calm and regulated, and then that's the time to make the plan. Because if we make a plan and we're really anxious, it's probably not going to be a very realistic plan, and it might be a plan that we're being really hard on ourselves and kind of, you know, pushing the study too much. So when we're feeling calm, and maybe when we've got support, that's the time to make it, and then much less likely to get overwhelmed when that happens. The next one here is about last minute exam tips. So even like in the presentation, when we get to kind of like the last minute, all we want to do is be in that space where we're calm enough to remember things. So I think like everyone will think of, you know, if you go for a job interview and a piece of information that you know very, very well is gone from your head, and that's the effect of anxiety. So for the last minute, what we want to, right before the exam, is to get as calm as we possibly can. And because when we're calm, we're able to recall things much better. So that would be a tip. How to stay focused and not get distracted. Just find the strategies that work for you. It's always good to ask, what's the function? What am I trying to do? And then setting a realistic goal. And then just knowing your own limits, like knowing how you work best and keeping within that, instead of maybe feeling like have to prove myself by studying X amount of hours. But if it's not working for you and you're getting distracted, then it's not really working. So,
And
sorry, Kate.
I just had a thought just as you were mentioning there about getting overwhelmed with the work, and the importance of staying calm as well in that situation. So being calm so that you can take in the information. But just as well to mention that it's important to have times of rest throughout the day, throughout the week. It's not just right before the exam, or it's not just right before your study. It's actually, recently I was listening to it that in those times of rest where you're doing nothing or you're daydreaming, your brain is taking in that information that might come back to you in that exam, and that you may not even have realized that you've taken it in. So it's really important that you're not busy all the time and keeping busy with study, that it's just allows time for rest as well, and that could be doing nothing. A combination of all those nice things, study and then complete rest as well.
This one is are there any additional strategies around sensory regulation with regard to young people with autism and exam stress? So I suppose each person is different, so it'd be hard to kind of make sensory recommendations because everyone's kind of sensory profile is different. The movement breaks that we did would be really important for any young people with autism or ADHD. Those movement breaks are really important, and it helps with regulation. And then it's not true across the board, but like autism sensory profiles, it tends to be more about triggers, that that there's more kind of noise can be an issue, too much tactile input can be an issue. So finding the kind of what the triggers are, but then also finding what the regulators are. Like if the young person can tolerate a weighted blanket, they're really good. They have a very good calming effect. They take us out of the fight or flight. Not everyone can tolerate them, but they do have a calming effect, and they have a kind of a focus effect as well. When we're calm and we're in a place to learn. So thinking, what you want to do and the best ways to get there. Again, it varies from person to person. Do you have anything else on that one?
I suppose with this as well is that it's looking at autism, and to mention that, again, it's autism, ADHD, but neurodiverse or neurotypical, it really depends on the person. So you have to figure out what the person needs. Everybody is different. Everybody has their own way that works. Because this is asking, I suppose, with autism, I'm thinking that it's really important for the person to have structure. So to know what is coming next is crucial, is key, that if there's going to be an hour of study, what comes after that? And that will allow the person to focus more during that time, because they know what the next activity is, I suppose, after the study. And that just puts them at ease, I suppose, to be able to focus on what they have to do, and then they move into the next activity after that. And that works for a lot of people, not autism alone, but it works for a lot of people when they know what's next. It's almost, we look forward to it, especially if it's exams that we're studying for, or anything that we don't particularly want to be doing. If we know something good is coming after it, or perhaps if we've done something nice beforehand, it's a little bit easier. Can make it a little bit easier.
Just because sometimes if someone is autistic, they find it difficult with change and managing transitions. Doing something like a movement break or a Starfish exercise before going on to the next activity will help the person manage that transition into moving from one thing to the next. So the next one, do you have any tips for motivating students to study, focus better, particularly in the morning? So this is, so one thing, teenagers' circadian rhythm is a little bit different to us adults and to children, in that they tend to take a while to get going in the morning, maybe about 11 a.m. before things are kind of focusing. and then want to stay up later. So the morning times is an issue for adolescents. So for everyone, because our kind of cortisol levels are a little bit higher, doing movement in the morning, so doing like a yoga sequence, something energizing, doing weights, any of those things with real strong sensory feedback are really going to help. Going straight into study in the morning is going to be difficult for everyone. Do you have anything else with that one?
I think a lot of people got excited there because they probably thought you were advocating for teenagers to stay in bed until 11 o'clock.
There is a movement to change the school times because of it. Yeah, you know, but sorry.
Unfortunately, there is an element of self-responsibility that adolescents have as well, and that's part of the growing up, isn't it? That you have to, I suppose, it's crucial for you to see why you're doing something, and an end goal, maybe a purpose of why you're doing it is really important here. So if you know why you're doing something, that helps with your motivation. If you can see or envision what it will look like, you know, when it's finished, or have something to look forward to, that helps with motivation as well. Reminding of that. And again, sometimes it's really helpful for visuals for that. Journals, writing things down, just those self-reminders as to what's motivating for the person. But yeah, and getting up in the morning.
Yeah. So how many hours study per day is recommended? So I wouldn't give an amount because it's more about what you do rather than like a quantifiable. You know, it can be great to be able to say, oh, I did 3 hours of study, but if it wasn't high quality work. So I'd say, again, with that kind of planning beforehand, so because it is really overwhelming, you've got so many subjects, it seems like so much, but to take it in chunks of what needs to be done that week and making a plan based on the work that's needed to be done, rather than going, I must do X amount of hours because that's the recommendation. To be like, you know, using techniques that really help with focus, it's going to improve the quality of the study anyway that you do. Strategies to minimize phone usage or scrolling. Very hard to do. What I would say is it's hard, and I think it's hard to kind of take a kind of punitive stance, but I'd say if there's phone usage there, trying to match it with the more kind of movement regulation, doing the kind of strategies to kind of counterbalance the amount of phone usage, ideally putting your phones away, putting it on do not disturb from even 7 or 8 p.m. at night, because it's important for our even winding down at night. I know everyone's heard about blue lights and how activating they are, but there's also a thinking about what you're thinking about before bed, because that's going to impact, I think for anyone now, no one should watch the news before they go to bed, because that's what's going to be in your head. But thinking about what's going in and how that's going to affect you. So there's no kind of, I can't really think of any techniques in particular to manage.
I suppose habits. It's building habits, incorporating habits into your day, into your routine. And again, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. I think we did some training, and it's 30 days before we can really say that a habit becomes maybe easier to do, routine. Yeah. So that's a month. But we all have to do it. We all have to practice these things. So it's probably making it part of your routine where you do put the phone away, and you have structure in the day that allows for time that's for study and just study alone.
Could be part of kind of executive functioning plan. You know, what do I find difficult and what's getting in the way? And if phone usage is getting in the way, then it's part of your study plan as well, of, you know, making it realistic and, you know, manageable to limit the phone use for study. So explain how cortisol affects executive functioning skills like planning and focus during exams. So the cortisol is the stress, and I suppose the executive functioning again is kind of not fully developed in the young person, But when we're very stressed, this front part of our brain is not working. So they kind of, you need to kind of balance the two. So if there's too much cortisol, then those executive functioning strategies are not manageable. So that's what makes it difficult to kind of, you know, do any planning or problem solving when you're doing that. Do you have anything else on that one? No? So how do you recommend introducing mindfulness to teenagers who may be skeptical? So I suppose like there's things like the Starfish is like quite of a childish animation, but you know, things like, even if it's not mindfulness, practices like yoga, because when you do a relaxation at the end, Pilates, weights, if mindfulness seems like maybe, you know, not an option, there's also mindful movement, which is almost like a really slow Tai Chi movement. But sometimes when we use our body, it's easier than saying, let's say, doing the kind of traditional sitting, breathing meditation. So incorporating movement into it can really help. Then, yep, so I think that's all our questions. Yep.
Sorry, I actually thought of one.
Great, yeah.
How important is sleep in terms of managing stress?
Very, very important. Yeah, yeah. So sleep is, I think like the first sign that we're stressed, you know, for anyone is that we'll notice that our sleep is off. So managing, if we're not managing stress, it's going to affect our sleep. So how our kind of system, you know, when we talk about fight or flight, so fight or flight is when the sympathetic nervous system is active. And to get out of fight or flight, we need to go into the parasympathetic. And if we're not able to do that a lot, the parasympathetic part of our nervous system needs to be active for us to get to sleep. So it means if we're stressed all day, it's much harder for us to kind of do the switch down into getting into sleep. It's like, and true for anyone, like if we've got a really, really stressful day and you kind of go, I'm going to fall into bed tonight and I'm going to be out like that. But if we'd had a really stressful day with no breaks, what we might find is that we're physically exhausted, we get into bed and our mind is racing. And that's a sign that cortisol is really, really high and we're really stressed. So sleep and stress are really, really linked.
And what sort of techniques would you recommend, like just before going to sleep, to kind of activate the parasympathetic system?
So things like yoga. So even doing a little routine, like there's on YouTube, they'll do like a few exercises to help with sleep. Breathing techniques. So breathing, like doing breathing techniques activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's one called 4-7-8, which is really good. Yeah. So.
Or just even putting yourself in a situation where you take away.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
stimulation.
Yeah. A good rule is that your bedroom is just for sleeping and to have a well ventilated, and then if you can tolerate kind of weighted blankets, they can help as well because they activate the parasympathetic nervous system. But I suppose it's also important to remember that like sometimes, especially if we get into kind of a pattern of not sleeping, that your sleep routine or your kind of sleep hygiene, it doesn't start at 10 p.m. It kind of needs to be throughout the day. So it's really good to, you know, if we take times to maybe do a short mindfulness or breathing techniques throughout the day, and we're getting used to being able to kind of be relaxed, be active, be relaxed, be active. And when that kind of natural flow happens, then sleep happens automatically. So, yeah, I hope that, yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Great. Thank you. Good luck to everyone.